worsened by the pandemic, more and more voices are questioning this paradigm. With the European Union Next Generation funds coming soon, there's a high risk that this money will be spent in so-called green projects led by the same big companies that caused the problem in the first place by seeking high profits regardless of the side effects of their actions. Cities and towns will get their share of these funds, and so the debate is which is the best way to invest this money to leave the crisis behind. Can we adopt an alternative economic model which is not based on eternal growth? So today we will discuss this with Gabriela Cabaña. Gabriela is from Chile. She's from the Department of Anthropology of the London School of Economics, and she's also a member of the Center of Social Environmental Analysis and the Chilean Network of Basic Income, and she participates in the degrowth movement. We have also Kate Rayworth. Kate is, and I quote this from her own website, a renegade economist focused on making economics fit for 21st century realities. She is the creator of the Doughnut of Social and Planetary Boundaries and co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. She's as well as Senior Associate of Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute, where she teaches on the Masters in Environmental Change and Management. She is also Professor of Practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. And we finally have Eloy Badia. Eloy is a Climate Emergency and Ecological Transition Counselor at the Barcelona City Council. He's an environmental activist, first of all, and active member of Aigua és Vida, or Water is Life, la Xarxa per la Sobirania Energètica, the Energetic Sovereignty Network, and the Aliança contra la Pobresa Energètica, Alliance Against Energetic Poverty. So I'd like to open this session asking you a question to you all. At this moment, everybody seems to agree now that a drastic reduction in greenhouse gases emissions is needed. But can the global economy be decoupled from carbon in time to reach the targets? Can we trust or hope an effective technological solution that doesn't imply reducing these emissions will be implemented in time? Should we start with Gabriela first?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone, for being here today talking about these very important and pressing issues. And as Tony said, I consider myself part of the degrowth community, so it would be no surprise that I will be making a point for letting go our obsession and our addiction to economic growth as not only an important number, but as a key feature that brings together our civilizational horizon and our perspective of what it means to have a good life. So there is growing evidence from both degrowth and post-growth economics that is showing that decoupling economic growth from resource use, what we call green growth, the idea that we can continue increasing GDP while maintaining or even decreasing resource use, is actually impossible, or at least there is no enough empirical evidence to expect this will happen in the future. And it's important to say that it's very unlikely that it will happen at the scale, depth, and magnitude and resilience that we so urgently need. So, you might hear that in one or another year, one country or one place managed to bring down carbon dioxide emissions while increasing GDP, but this is far from being the huge, huge transition and deep transformation that we need to do to make sure that we are actually implementing changes that will allow us to rely on lower resource and energy use into the future. So we need to take this limitation seriously. And actually, this is so clear, this dependency of growth on increasing the use of resources, that in our current policy scenarios, as those famously built and shared by the IPCC, we are still trusting in most scenarios in scaling up technologies of carbon capture that do not yet exist or are still at a very experimental phase of implementation. So I would argue that this is hugely irresponsible. It is a hugely irresponsible approach to trust in that these magic technologies are going to come and solve this problem that we have, and that we need to take a different path. And for this, we need to be extremely clear in that renewable energies have limits. They have both physical limits. They rely, for instance, on rare minerals, rare materials that have a limited supply on Earth. And they also rely heavily on fossil fuels. For instance, wind turbines are built mostly of plastic. But they also have limits in the social and geographical sense, we could say. The implementation of large renewable infrastructure projects relies on a logic of displacement. We often avoid asking this uncomfortable question of where are we going to build all these huge, wind farms and solar panels that we need to replace, that we need for replacing fossil fuels. And it tends to be, it's already happening that it's being done on indigenous lands, on lands of poor rural areas, and these lands are paying huge ecological crisis for that. So we cannot expect that to continue this deployment of renewables at a massive scale that would, as I said, be needed to sustain our current energy use. And here I might speak as an anthropologist that there is one historical fact that we need to understand and that also remains hidden in our analysis that are very short term. That this is that the untapping of fossil fuels that we did in the last 200 years as humanity give us an incredible source of very concentrated and apparently cheap energy for a short period of time. I say apparently cheap because it had and it has many negative consequences, the use of fossil fuels, as we know, that have been intentionally overlooked. So cheap energy can continue circulating globally. And this circulation of energy globally, of fossil fuels globally, has been reproducing inequalities, reproducing structures of oppression, and actually increase the accumulation of wealth of a few and giving them more power over the many. So why are we expecting that our transition to a completely different form of energy would have to give us the same amount of energy availability that we got from fossil fuels? We need to understand that this is not possible, and that we don't need to reduce the use of energy by sacrificing and by giving up to all the comforts of life, but that actually we can redesign society to provide good quality of life and well-being and prosperity for everyone if we redesign the political economies in which we live. So I think we need to start asking that question more honestly, stop turning a blind eye into these facts, and start thinking about the transition as a deeper transformation that is also a political transformation that cannot rely on these eco-modernist fantasies of energy abundance. So more than just sit down and wait for policymakers to make up new techno-fixes. Every year we hear about this new machine that can suck CO2 from the environment. We even hear about mechanical trees that will do the job that the trees we're cutting cannot do anymore. So rather than waiting for that, we must challenge the ideology of economic growth and ask, why is this so ingrained in the first place in our institutions and in our way of lives? And not just as part of economics, but in a wider sense, in the way we organize our lives and our expectations. And I guess I will save more details about that for the next round of questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Gabriela. Kate?
Thank you. Great to hear Gabriela's answers as well, and great to be here. I greatly agree with much that she said, a lot of what she said. So I'm going to start by giving us the shape of 20th century progress. This was the shape that we're talking about, growth. It's an exponential growth curve, and it underlies every 20th century political conversation and macroeconomics lecture and economic journalism, the assumption that this is what success looks like. And of course, the addiction to this shape of success is why we're asking this question. But can we still have this while decoupling? And can we find a technology that will make this carry on being possible? So it's interesting how this is so strongly put forward as the norm. And I know we're precisely here today to challenge it, but I'm bringing it because it's the norm against which we are responding. I want to show another shape, which I think is the one that is guiding what we're doing now. This is humanity's self-portrait, I believe, in these early days of the 21st century, not even so early anymore. We're 1/5 of the way into this century now. And this is the alarm bell that billions of people are still falling short on their essential needs without the resources they need for a decent life, as Gabriela just explained: health, education and housing, transport, healthcare and food and water and connection. So billions of people falling short on the essentials of life, and we have already overshot multiple planetary boundaries on climate change that we're talking about right now. But let's just remember, it's not the only one. And we are actually running down multiple life support systems of this planet because of the way we are releasing greenhouse gases, but also because of the way we are using Earth's materials, the minerals, the metals, again, as Gabriella was referring to. And we must always think of these together. There's a risk we get fixated on tackling climate change at the risk of ignoring the way we destroy Earth's life support systems and ecosystems in the extraction of materials. So we must tackle these both. Coming into this space from both sides at the same time so that we eliminate all of the red in this picture is, to me, the 21st century shape of progress. And to me, this is the goal that comes first, that the dynamic of the economy that we must now move towards. The 20th century was dominated by the dynamic of growth on the presumption that it would and should and must be endless. And we need to replace that by a dynamic that actually is regenerative and distributive and brings us back into this space. So then we ask, can we decarbonize our economies and still have that growth? And like Gabriella, I've looked at the literature, and what I see, I started working on this question well over a decade ago. And at the time, there was very little evidence, very little data actually to really look at. And what I've seen over the time is, first of all, it was that some countries, a few, were managing to have a rising GDP and reducing their production emissions domestically. And I thought at the time, well, that's all that's going to be possible. I was really surprised then when some data came through. And I'm just going to take for now that the data does what it claims to do. It misses some things, but I'm going to assume the data is good enough, right? I'm not going to deeply question the data. We can do that, but I'm going to just assume the data. Let's assume the data is telling us something. There came through a group of countries, actually, around 20 countries that have seen a growing GDP, not only reducing their production-based carbon emissions, but also reducing their consumption-based carbon emissions, and that they've gone slightly negative. Now that's I didn't expect that. And I caught myself in this debate about green growth or not, because I hadn't anticipated that, and I thought it was impossible. And I was really surprised when it came, and it made me realize I already had a bias, as it were. I had a preferred outcome, that I wanted this not to be possible, because I didn't want it to seem that we could so easily move to green growth. I thought it was a dangerously tempting narrative. So I'm just admitting that I had a preference or a predisposition to what I thought the evidence was going to show. And that really shocked me out of my position and made me much more open to what could be possible. But what strikes me in all the evidence I've seen to date is that, yes, there are some nations, including nations in Europe, that have managed to sustain a growing GDP and have falling consumption-based emissions. However, because there's a danger that people say, this is it, green growth paradigm, look, this is the evidence, we're doing it. The scale at which those emissions are falling is something like 1% to 2% a year. Now, if you start not with the dream of green growth, and we can see a tiny bit of evidence of it, but we start with the imperative of decarbonization, then 1% to 2% a year is nothing like the speed and scale of cuts that is required. And so my position ends up just where Gabriella was, saying there's absolutely no evidence that it can happen with the speed and the scale and the magnitude that is required to come back within planetary boundaries. And I absolutely do not believe that we should believe in or wait for a technology that is not yet proven to do this. That's the most dangerous. Even if somebody believes that technology is going to come, the betting on it, giving up all safety in betting on the possibility of a future that is convenient for your worldview is an incredibly dangerous position to go to. So I think we absolutely have to cut our carbon emissions on the acceptance of the technologies that we have today, which are many. And actually, there are social technologies of sharing, of reducing, of changing our lifestyles. And this too is a means of cutting carbon emissions. So I think we have to remove our addiction or our deep structural dependency upon endless growth, because it is in no way rational or reasonable to expect that that can and should be the future of every country. And I want to be very clear, I'm talking right now about high income countries. So the world's nations, I'm going to use my hosepipe one more time, right? I think of this is nature's growth curve. Things grow and they grow up and then they mature, and that's how they survive. Now, we could even imagine the world's countries somewhere along this curve. So there are plenty of countries in the world, I'm going to name Bangladesh and Malawi for starters, that have low incomes and many people living in deprivation. And I absolutely believe their economies need to grow, not for the sake of growth, but because that activity should be a sign that people are able to provide food and have housing and transport and education and healthcare and all the things needed to meet their human rights. And we see that reflected in economic activity. So those nations, yes, they should and can and must have economic growth. That brings them into a transformed economy. There are nations in the middle, I'm using my nose as a third finger here, there are nations in the middle that are have severe deprivation or some deprivation and are already overshooting planetary boundaries. They're in a very challenging position because they need to transform while still meeting people's needs. But there are nations up here, and I'm talking of these right now. They are the most obvious cases where we need to deeply transform. And I'm talking about my nation, the UK, I'm talking about Spain and Europe and the US and Australia and Canada and New Zealand and Japan. High income nations that are richer than any country ever has been in the history of humanity. These are the nations where we have massive overshoots of our carbon footprints, including historically, and our material footprints, and we need to radically decarbonize and dematerialize. And this is where I think the responsibility sits first, to learn what it is like to have an economy that thrives without depending upon endless growth. And I say that, and I know it's not easy. It's not easy, but that's why we need to get started now, sooner, in looking at those structural dependencies and removing them.
Thanks, Kate. Actually, on this technology issue you prompted, we have a big controversy here in Barcelona now, because there's some business sectors that are pushing to enlarge Barcelona airport. And when you point out the environmental damage or even the environmental crisis we're facing, that and we should be cutting down the emissions, their argument is, look, by the time the work is finished, there will be ecological planes. And this is absolutely irreal. I mean, it cannot be, but it's the argument that they're using just to push forward and I'm sure Eloy can say a lot about this. Eloy, your turn.
Okay, thank you very much. For me, it's a pleasure to be here with Kate, Gabriela, and Tony. I will try to use my best English. I work hard on that, but my mother language is Catalan and Spanish, but I will help on that. For me, it was very interesting, the answer at the question that you launched, Tony. And I will start a little bit pessimistic, because you say we arrive on time, no, for the challenge. And I am not sure that we arrive on time for all. I think that there are some processes that at this moment now they are irreversible. That there's no, we cannot go coming back. No, if we are thinking on biodiversity or we are thinking on ecosystems, we are arriving late, and maybe for some parts of our life will change forever. No, but if we say we arrive on time, that the disaster it not be bigger, will be more no bigger, no greater. No, we can arrive on time to make a lot of issues. No, but we have to be clear that now we are in adaptation process. It's not a future disaster. It's a disaster that it's happening now. No, and on the other part, you say everybody seems to agree that we need to reduce emissions. No. And this tension is very powerful, because maybe 10 years ago, we never said everybody seems to agree, no? Because the people that say that climate change didn't exist, it happens very, very close, no? We now, there are people like Trump or Bolsonaro that last year they are talking about that maybe it's not a problem, no? But I am agree that there is maybe a consensus or a majority of people that say that is a real problem, no? And we know now that it's not a problem that it happened far away, no? It's not a problem with the polar bears, no? It's a problem with the wave that we have now in Canada, with the heating wave, or with the fires in California and Australia. It's a problem that it's happening in Barcelona. It's not far away from Barcelona. And that was very useful to understand that we have a big challenge, no? And I think the problem is not to understand the problem. Now the problem that we have is to understand the solution of the problem, no? Because we understand very well that we need to go to another way, but the young people didn't understand which is the way that the politicians and the society is making, where we have to go, no? Because the steps are very slow. We are making some initiative, and I think that absolutely is not only a technological debate. This is not the debate, but it's not only, it's more complex than only a problem of political will. Normally we say, okay, it's a problem of political will. Not only, it's more complex than a political will, no? And I want to be a little provocative. I say maybe the challenge is how the fight to climate change win elections, because it's not easy that the fight to climate change wins elections. Because on the other way, our opponent say the comfort can be a solution. If we don't make anything, the technology, the companies, the economy will solve the problem, no? And this is a great opponent, because what we are saying is that we need to change the cultural, and that's not there. We have been more than 2,000 years creating a cultural of growth, of capitalism, of this is the solution of technological, and we want to change that in a very few years, no? And that's not easy. And until now, we are saying that the problem is individual habits, no? We have to close the light when we go out from the room, or you have to recycling at home, or you have to use the public transport, and that's enough. And now we know that this is not enough, no? When we talk about the lights, we are talking that we have to change the energy model, all the model of energy, not only turn off the light, no? And when we talk about the waste, we have to change all the waste management, no? Not only recycling at home. Or when we talk about the transport, we have to change all the mobility and the urban process, no? So it's a big change of economical and social change that we need to implement it, no? And is to change the economical model and to change the way we're living, no? But I want to finally more optimistic, no? This big change sometimes seems to be impossible, no? Because the problem is so big that you say, okay, we cannot solve this problem. It's a fatigue, no? We have to accept that there is no way, no? But when we talk about how we have to solve, we talk about solar panels in our houses. We talk about efficiency in our houses, to rebuilding the houses for efficiency. We talk about recycling, goes to door, circular economy. We talk about, okay, why we don't, the food that we take is from proximity and is not based in meat. And we talk, okay, we can use more the bicycle than the public transport. And it not sounds impossible. For me, okay, solar panels, efficiency energy, bicycle, and waste, and door-to-door, and ecological food. That sounds possible. If the challenge to solve the planet, no, is to make that, okay, I can commit it on that, no? So we need to make that, for that this happens, okay, we have to change the cultural, but we have to make that the economies goes there, no? We need to make a clear legislation to say, okay, we need from the market to provide this solution, because these solutions are not impossible, no? So I think it's a big challenge, but the changes of our life that we have to do are not so big or are not so difficult to succeed. I am optimistic on that.
Thanks, Eloy. Before we go to the next question, and I would like to remind the audiences that if they want to prompt any questions to our panelists, just write them down in the Zoom chat, and I'll redirect them to them when it's your time. So, second question, and this question is doesn't have much to do with the debate itself, but I'd like to ask you all that, because we're in this debate of the green growth, the greenwashing, and question is, what is your opinion about the conditions the European Union has set to grant the next generation funds? Do you think they're a step in the right direction, or are they just greenwashing? Gabriela?
Thank you, Tony. Before answering that, I just would like to make a point on what Eloy was just saying, because I think it's very important in the narratives we bring into conversation when we talk about these challenges. I agree with most of what he said, but I would like to give like a different point of view on the need and the feasibility. of these challenges. Something that I already said, but something that I really like about degrowth is that it offers you the possibility of a better life. It's not a life of sacrifice. You know, economic growth is a paradigm that asks you to sacrifice for the economy. Degrowth will be the opposite. It will be actually be a better life, a life that we can enjoy more, you know, more convivial life. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind whenever we discuss the political feasibility, because the political feasibility of not doing anything, that's madness. You know, that's going to be really ugly things will happen if we just assume that there is no way of stopping this train that it's going at high speed. So I just wanted to make that point. And on the question of the next generation funds, well, as I said, as Tony said, actually, I am from Chile, and that's where I do my research. That's where I'm from. But since I live and study in the UK, not the EU, but it's still close enough. I was just taking a look and trying to understand what was the logic of these funds. And it was funny because for the name, I thought they would include something more specific and ambitious about climate or the ecological emergency more widely. And I realized that no, that it was like a mainstream, you know, like a big bunch of money being thrown at the economy with the expectation that it's going to wake it up and it's going to stimulate it so we can all go back to our consumption levels before the pandemic hit. And so my critical answer would be that what the EU is doing with these funds is not different to what many post-COVID funds are doing around the world. And I think it was, you know, last year there was like a couple of months in which all countries were talking about post-COVID recovery, and they all repeat the same known formula, you know, big investment projects, reactivate employment. And for instance, in the case of Chile, our own post-COVID recovery plan even proposed, some economists all came together and even proposed speeding up the evaluation of the environmental evaluation of large investment projects as a way of, you know, reducing bureaucratic barriers to investment. And, you know, they thought that this was something positive, completely overlooking like the disaster and the complete vulneration to democratic principles that would imply. But, you know, we are so blind to the other elements that mainstream economics doesn't address, that this is the only answer we can give. And I'm afraid this will be the only answer that mainstream economics is going to give. Doesn't matter the crisis, the answer is always the same. And we know it doesn't work. So, you know, here is just, we seem to be trapped in this vision. So, and here I also want to say that how we do this transition that we talk about so much is key. And it might be controversial to say it, but I think that we could still build a ton of green infrastructure and still be in a huge social and ecological crisis. This is completely compatible. For instance, again, where I do research in the south of Chile, I was living in an island, in one of the islands of the Chiloé archipelago, where water availability relies on peatland, which is a form of soil that keeps the water and then releases it. We don't have water from ice from the mountains. And now they are putting large wind parks where these peatlands grow. So, you know, they're not just huge carbon sinks, but they also are critical for the maintenance of that delicate ecosystem. So you have these large infrastructural interventions that on paper, and even for the accounting of our national emissions are going to show like something good, but actually on the ground are not being lived as something good. So if we continue focusing on emissions only, as these and other recovery plans or Green New Deals even are doing, at the expenses of the care of the web of life, we will continue repeating the mistakes and injustices that took us here in the first place. And here I think it's super important to bring the political part and say that a corporate-led energy transition won't be a just transition. If we want to have a just transition, we need to bring other concepts such as energy sovereignty, like as part of a plurinational idea of sovereignty. And it's not possible to have them going side by side, right? Because sometimes we see these big announcements of big projects, and we put on the side, you know, as a footnote, like, oh, we are also supporting community-led projects on energy. We're also giving some panels to some people in rural areas, but this is not, it cannot be just a green layer or just a thin community layer on a large corporate transition. So yeah, just to repeat what I said before, like the problem of all these plans, that all these plans share is that they diagnose the main problem to be a low economic activity, low growth, a contraction or recession, and the fear of a future depression. So they aim at pumping growth back again. And for me, it's incredible that in response to something like COVID, the main problem you identify is the lack of growth and not the fact that, you know, society was falling apart and people were dying. So we are going to invest in building bridges and highways, but not in building, say, social care or like making sure everyone can take care of each other. So here's just, again, one more argument to shift from our growth-centered paradigm and look into alternatives, like the one that Kate already brilliantly explained.
Thanks, Gabriela. Kate, what's your view on this issue?
Yeah, sure. So transformation doesn't happen in calm times. It's the crises that open up a crack in history that give us the chance to bring about changes that we already knew we needed to make. And I'm really fascinated through the work I've been doing with Doughnut Economics Action Lab. I see some policymakers at city level who absolutely see this and get this and seize this and run with this, and others who may be overwhelmed by it, and which I can understand at a human level, or simply want to build back to where we were, or indeed that crack in history gets seized to further the corporate interest. I really think if you don't reach into those opportunities and promote a progressive transformation, it will be drawn further towards the interests of vested interest, as Naomi Klein so brilliantly wrote about in her book, The Shock Doctrine. So these funds are a powerful opportunity. They include a really important principle like the do no significant harm principle, which is a really important step beyond the typical assessment of projects, which was cost benefit analysis. And we can add up the costs and we can add up the benefits and see whether they weigh. And these can be spun in any direction, and whatever the costs, as long as the benefits seem high enough and the benefits of growth, then we do it anyway. This plan has the do no significant harm principle, which says, no, you cannot incur costs. And that, like all principles, depends on whether it's actually brought to life in practice and what happens when these ideas are actually turned into plans and policies. So there was a really good report done by the Zoe Institute and New Economics Foundation called A Future Fit Recovery. And they analyzed the national resilience and recovery plans of many European member states that they were submitting to the European Commission to get some of this funding. And they found that not one of the countries that they surveyed, including Spain, had a national resilience and recovery plan which delivered anything like the deep transformation that's needed to direct European nations towards the sustainable future we already know we need. So the ambition is not there. And then, of course, there's the danger that as the money actually turns from a big vision to the bureaucratic management of funds and handing them out, what actually happens in that? And I think it's really valuable to hear that there's a big debate happening in Spain, because it's when the civic engagement happens around the slow bureaucratic implementation, right? It's one thing when they announce it with a launch of an announcement and it's in the newspapers, but actually it's how it slowly gets done over the coming months as to whether or not these kinds of funds possibly live up to the transformatory potential that was somewhere written into the vision. I have absolutely no doubt that there are really committed, ambitious change makers involved in writing these plans. I have no doubt. I know some of them, some European Commission staff, people who work for national governments absolutely want to see this happen. But there's a long road between a vision and a policy and the actual implementation of that policy and how the money ultimately got spent. And it requires civic engagement all the way along the line locally to hold it to the highest standard that it can be held to.
And finally, Eloy.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little agree with Kate that for me, when I read the next generation funds, what I read I like it. What my doubt is, what is the reality of these funds, no? But let me share, first of all, what happened in the last crisis in 2008 and 2011, and we can see which is the recommendation that Troika say to Greece, no? To say, okay, if you want to access to funds for European Commission, you need to make a big budget for privatizations. They have to privatizations, the water, the lottery. They have to reduce the pensions. They have to make a labor reform, and they have to save the banks. And that was the recent past of the European, because this is not from the last, well, it's the last century, but it's only 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the recommendation for a crisis to get money from the Europe, it was this recipe. It's privatization, reduce the pensions, labor reform, and save the bank. No? And what we read now is very different. I agree that absolutely, yes, that we can improve, and there are some aspects that can be better. But we read some others say, okay, we need a transition, ecological and digital for the economy. No? And I agree with that. I think that when they make the description, which is the future of the economy, they say ecological and they say digital. No? And for me, this is broken at the tension between ecological and economy. They say, no, the future of the economy is ecological. And when you see the new Green Deal for European Commission, they say the word that goes close to economy is not growth, it's not development, it's sustainable. They say, okay, the economy has to be sustainable. So when I read the next generation funds, I like it what I read, no? But we have to see now how they implement it. Because when they say the money to the states, what happened now, no? Because, for example, these days we notice that Ecologistas in Action, make a document that say we are finding hydrogen, we are finding gas in these funds, no? And we have to be in alert to make attention and to be clear that which is the conditions and the purpose of the fund. But for me, the most what I am more upset is not with the funds of next generations, is the budget of the countries, because the policy it's okay. The fund can help in a lot of issues. The funds maybe we are not okay in some projects, but if we see the budget of the countries, we are totally against of this kind of budget. No, what now is happening is that the Spanish government say, okay, I can finance solar panels. Okay, I have in my budget I have money, but I put this money in the fund, and I use this money that I save to make to increase the airport of Barcelona 40%. And it's the same money, because the money I put the green money in the fund of the European Commission, and I save money to make another kind of policies. And this kind of contradiction that now we are implemented projects that never can be financed by this kind of fund, and we are financed with the national budget, no? And this kind of contradiction for me is what we have to make more pressure, and we have to say, no, we want that Spanish budget, the same direction that we have in the next generation funds, or we want an horizon for the Spanish government, okay, where we want to go. But these are very contradictions with projects that now we are implemented at local level, at level of an airport in Barcelona, with these kind of funds at European level. No? And for me, that is why I am more upset. And I have to put more efforts to denounce that and to say that we need a big agreement for the national budget too.
Thanks, Eloi. We have already a couple of questions from the audience, but I'd like to finish up the round of questions that are on the script. There's 2 more round of questions, and then we'll go into the audience questions. So next question for you all is there any feasible alternative to this model of growth based on something so unfair as GDP? For those unfamiliar with the concept, GDP is an indicator that measures the market value of all the final goods and services produced in a specific time period. But GDP doesn't compute, for example, all the care economy, and doesn't take into account the harm done to the environment. And as an example, and I'm sorry for those of you who already heard this example from me, and an oil tank spillage, such as the Exxon Valdez in Alaska or the Prestige in Galicia, where thousands of oil tons are spilled into the sea, it's not considered. But all the cleaning tasks that come afterwards imply hiring personnel, buying the cleaning products, the accommodation and catering of personnel and volunteers, etc. So all these goods and services are computed. So in terms of GDP, an oil tank spillage generates economic growth. How insane is that? Gabriela?
Well, it's extremely insane. It's a symptom of the insanity of we're living in. And it's about time we start talking about these things like that. I mean, it's just completely irrational. And well, when we think about alternative, this is like my favorite part when in these debates, because here is when we need to, get over our neoliberal trauma and get over this slogan of there is no alternative. Like we have this very teleological reading of history that is like, oh, I've sometimes read people on the internet saying, if you wanted to avoid climate change, you would have to go 10,000 years in the past and stop people from inventing agriculture, something like that. Like this is our tragic history of mankind. This is the price we need to pay for progress, and there is no other way of doing things, and we are in this road until the end, and to self-annihilation. And I really think this is completely misleading, and we need to decolonize our imagination from these narratives. And here to think about alternatives, I really like a concept that we use a lot on degrowth, because degrowth is not, it's not really the opposite of growth, because it doesn't say, oh, we should all follow this one indicator, we should all follow this one rule, and this is going to lead us to the path of progress. It's actually questioning these ideas of development and progress, and opening our minds to different worlds that we call the pluriverse. It's not a concept we made up. It's a concept taken and proposed by the Zapatistas in their own political struggles of showing that other worlds are possible, that other political communities are possible, for instance, not necessarily inside the state where so often we take our efforts and our aims. So if we want to think of alternatives to this, we need to think of autonomy. The struggles for autonomy, at least here in Latin America, are very rich, mainly from our indigenous people, but also from peasants' movements. And this rich tradition, this rich history of other ways of living can show us alternatives that are not destructive and are not ingrained or do not couple with this idea of growth. So for instance, we can think of forms of sharing work, of collaborative work, like the Minga, which is an institution here in many areas of South America. We can think of alternatives to property. Like we tend to think that property is a natural form of relating with people and with land and with objects, and this is not necessarily so. This idea that we have today of property actually has a very particular history from the concept that existed in Rome, and that something that gives you the ability to destroy something that you own, for instance. But most people across time don't really have this idea of ownership. You can be a steward of something. You can be the responsible of taking care of something that then you inherit to the people that go after you. And just transforming these ideas, like what is work, what is property, can already help us envision different forms of civilization. And I think this is important. I mentioned the case of property because very recently I was having a similar conversation with a group of economists and tax lawyers from Chile. And I was trying to explain them what the principles of degrowth were. And one of the things they told me, I had never heard. One of the lawyers told me, look, but the problem with this model is that the state gets its revenues from the profit that companies do. So if you want to move to a system in which maybe you don't have profits, you just pay people their wages, their salaries, and then you do something else with that money, then how are you going to have revenues for the state? And I was like, that's a very interesting question. Those are the sort of questions. And he was like, that would mean challenging this idea of property. You have to transform what property is. And I was like, yes, I would very much like to do that. Those are exactly the conceptions that we need to be able to discuss seriously, because sometimes here in Chile, I'm sure this happens in many places, you say something like we need to discuss what property is, and people are like, you want to be a communist, you want the state to own everything, this is impossible, this already failed. At least here in Chile, that's a very common argument. And it's like, no, we just need to remember that we have such a rich and long history. We have such a great conceptual toolbox of other ways of living. And, it's not just black and white. And one thing we can do is to start talking seriously about this in our political spaces or wherever we are. It can also be in our academic spaces, but here I'm speaking also from a more militant perspective on how we can foster this transformation towards decommodification of society. And just finally, for me, a degrowth society or degrowth as a concept is a tool, like a path, something that breaks the walls that we have today and allow us to dream of other worlds and to work towards them. And also a key principle that I think should be in the center of these conversations is this idea of a care-centered society. A society that it's focusing on human emancipation, that doesn't put life at the service to the economy, but rather the economy at the service of life. And this is both a feminist and an anti-colonial horizon. And here I think the ideas of degrowth can engage really nicely with these very rich traditions and help us see other ways of living.
Thanks, Emilian. So we have degrowth on one side. Kate, do you have any other alternatives?
So I want to come back to the question that you gave us, Tony, which was, is there can you say the question again, the first half of it? Is there any
feasible alternative to this never-ending economic model?
Yeah, and it seems like a reasonable question, but I want to really challenge that question because the model that we have now is not feasible, right? That question tacitly makes it sound like what we have is feasible and you're saying you don't want it, so we need to find something else that's feasible. But actually, this is not feasible. As we are seeing, the model that we have is driving GDP growth in some places and not others, into some pockets and not others. And it is destroying the life support systems of the only known living planet in the universe. It is not feasible. So actually the onus goes upon those who defend the current economy as to how on earth it is going to become feasible in time. And the problem is that it is so entrenched that it seems bizarre, it seems radical, it seems off the wall or out of the book to have to come up with an alternative, but it's exactly where everybody's attention should have been for decades, I would say. And I find it very frustrating that in economics education, which I received at Oxford University in 1990s, but still today, and I look at the economics textbooks of undergraduates and of school students, and it still presumes growth is the overarching goal. And when I speak to students, they only realize that they've never been invited to question this. It's just not even part of their lectures to say, what if growth isn't possible? What if growth isn't coming? What if growth wasn't desirable? What if growth wasn't necessary? They never have that conversation. And neither did I when I was a student. But if we start with that conversation and say, okay, you're studying these mainstream books and the mainstream tells us that we need growth, but let's just throw in one lecture that says, you know what, there's so much evidence that this model is not feasible, never has been, but the evidence is really screaming at us now. Then, if it turns out that an economy based on endless economic growth is not feasible, not possible or desirable, and not necessary, then what? Then how do we remove the growth dependency from the structures that we have inherited or created? And I think we need to do this in at least 3 rounds. So we have economies that are financially dependent upon endless growth, politically dependent, and socially dependent. I'll just give a couple of examples of each. So financial dependence. At the heart of the design of today's shareholder-owned companies, publicly traded companies, even if one of those companies wants to transform, and I've spoken to good ambitious people who work in those companies and have gone inside believing they can transform it. And you speak to them and they say, there's almost no room here to transform this company, because every quarter we have to show to our shareholders that we have growing sales and growing market share and growing profits. There is no room to change. So we have to look at the design of finance, which demands a return on investment quarter on quarter on quarter on quarter. And that is the most unnatural design on planet Earth. Nothing in nature delivers a return quarter on quarter on quarter on quarter on quarter. Things grow and they die and you harvest them and then they regenerate. So we have to rethink and reinvent finance. And the beautiful thing is we can reinvent it because it's merely a human invention. We are politically addicted to endless growth. No political leader wants to lose their place in the G20 family photo that's taken every year, the G7 photo that was taken in Cornwall recently. Nobody wants to be bumped out of that picture, but if their economy stops growing and other nations keep going, they will find themselves pushed off the end of the stage and replaced. So GDP growth at the moment is a very strong marker of geopolitical power. And of course, it gives you military power, and that's a really important one to recognize. And we need not just economists on this job, we need international relations theorists and political theorists and political activists and thinkers. How do we remove these political lock-ins to endless growth? And then we're socially addicted to growth because we've had a century of mass consumerism created by Edward Bernays, who invented propaganda or public relations. He was brilliant. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And he realized that his uncle's psychotherapy could be turned into retail therapy. And that if he could connect in our minds, my deep loneliness and alienation from society can be cured with that car or that laptop or that iPhone or that jacket. He did this brilliantly. And I wish Edward Bernays was alive today. I would say, well done, Edward. Now, please join the other team. Please put your mind to work to undo this psychological addiction to buying more, to believing that we transform ourselves with each purchase, and to believing that I will be doing good by my children if they own a bigger house than me and more cars than me, and they have more money than me. And actually, that's not what my children are after at all. My children are going on climate change marches and demanding a stable climate. So to me, we need people, and it goes way beyond the sphere of economics, but it needs to be addressed within economics. How do we remove this structural dependency upon an economy that has been designed for endless growth? Because there was cheap energy, so it seemed to be happening and it seemed to be coming, and now it's not. That is the work to be done. And if we put that at the center of economic thinking, it's incredibly exciting. And it's not just economic, it's transformational. So it has to get on the agenda. It has to be part of the syllabus. And it's a real crime to give any student an economic education that doesn't even invite them to recognize that these are the questions.
Wow. Eloy?
I don't have more information to add, maybe some ideas more, but Gabriela and Kate, they study a lot of that, and they're very, I am totally agree what they say. But for me, the question is, this model, it's permit us to get, to be better in equity, or we have less inequalities, we are more happiness with this model. It does have a relation, the GDP with the happiness with the life of the people? I think not. I think that 99% of the people, their life is nothing, there are no relation with the GDP. There are relation with a lot of other issues. If we think that the future have the reference for us has to be the GDP, we are not taking in account the issues that are important for the people. And it's not GDP for the people important. I think it's a lot of, is education, is the sanitation, is the relations, is the family, is the friends, is how, these are a lot of issues. It's not close to that topic, no? And for me, I normally take in account President of the United States Biden, because I think President of the United States is not, nobody thinks that is like, nobody thinks that he's a communist person or something like that, no? And Biden, with the inaugural speech, they say that the idea of the market will take us to a higher stage of welfare, not succeed. There was very clear, it's not succeed. We are more poor, we have more inequalities than yesterday. And the speech is that we need another way, no? And it's very similar when Obama says we need to create a new era of post-capitalism, no? And that was saying not for me, and that I'm only Aloy Badia from Barcelona, it's for the President of the United States to say the market is not providing what we need and what the people needs, no? So we need another model of economy, no? And absolutely, yes, we have alternative because the reality is an alternative model. For the majority of the people, when we have to fight against coronavirus, the alternative to fight the coronavirus is not the GDP, it's not the market, it's not the capitalism, it's not the big companies. It's the relation with the people, it's the sanitation, it's the education, it's other issues that we have to fight against coronavirus, no? And I'm absolutely agree that we have an alternative because we live in an alternative model that is not based in the GDP.
Thanks, Aloy. Okay, we have half an hour left. One last round of questions, and there's 3 questions from the audience. So I would like to ask you to try to be concise on this last question, so we have enough time to answer to the people. So next question. This is for Kate. Can you briefly explain your model? The Doughnut model is being implemented in Amsterdam and maybe other cities.
Yes, and this is the bit I love, because I'm happy to talk about what I'm against, but I don't think we get there when we only talk about what we're against. We get there by proposing what we're for, and sometimes a proposition is the strongest form of protest. So the Doughnut is a compass for the 21st century, which invites us to aim to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. It was first published in 2012. And straight away, people wanted to say, okay, I want to do that here in my town, in my city, my neighborhood. How can we do that here? And over the last couple of years, in forming Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we have started working with some cities and towns. And it's really exciting to see policymakers. And again, there are change makers, and I'm delighted to be here with Aloy today. There are change makers involved in government everywhere. I've really learned that. And not to disrespect the fact that some ambitious, transformative people go inside government and do everything they can there to make it happen. And when they come across an idea that works for the transformation they want to bring about, they seize it. And that's what I'm seeing happen. So in Amsterdam, the city, some of the deputy mayor and several of her staff wanted to create a circular strategy for the city, saying, yes, we must cut our carbon emissions, but we must also cut our material use. And they use the Doughnut as a framework for thinking about creating a holistic circular strategy. So they've committed to being 50% material use will be circular in that city by 2030. And 10% of city contracts next year will be circular contracts. To me, this is a really powerful proof that boundaries unleash creativity. When we put in place regulation that says, this is what the earth requires, let us live within the limits of the earth, that actually creates a whole load of innovation of how are we going to do that. Innovation that actually a generation of students, I think, have been taught to start thinking, and they get to do it and put it into practice. And we come up with ideas we would never think of if we weren't given that constraint of that challenge. So Amsterdam have embraced it. They launched their city portrait of the Doughnut in April 2020. In the midst of the COVID crisis. And I think that was also powerful. It showed that as we try to emerge from emergency, we need a new compass. And they inspired many other cities and places. I'm delighted that some work is beginning now in the city of Barcelona, as well as happening in Brussels and maybe in Toronto, in Copenhagen. There's interest in so many different cities. To me, this is a sign that city policymakers, one, are ready to innovate and to lead where national governments will follow, but two, are ready to pick up an idea that reflects the complexity of the city that they know they are working with. Cities are so complex, it's like a whole economy in one, and you need a concept that holds that whole space. So we are learning so much by working with these city change makers. And last thing I'll say is it's really important as well that the residents of that city are engaged, that this is a participatory and also met by civic society, because then they hold each other to account. So there's a strong network, the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition in Amsterdam, of civic people come together spontaneously and created this network. They hold the city government to a healthy account to keep moving and to keep making progress, because this work is not easy. You are trying to reinvent your economy at the scale of a city. and you're confronted around you by the old economy that will push back. So we need a network of cities leading in this work, and I have real faith that it may begin.
Thanks, Kate. Audience, please write down this sentence: boundaries unleash creativity. I just love it. Thanks a million. Gabriela, do you believe the Doughnut model is compatible or complementary with degrowth?
Yes, well, I absolutely think it is. The two concepts or the two perspectives go really well together. And here maybe I could just use, to make my intervention really brief, like maybe I could speak to those of you who have learned of Kate's approach and have seen this model of the Doughnut, that it's absolutely brilliant and so reasonable. And you see this model and you say, I want to do that. Like, why aren't we doing that in the first place? And in the moment when you start seeing the different barriers that Kate already mentioned, I think the degrowth literature can give you very important insights on why we are where we are. Like from understanding the history of why we even speak about the economy as if it was an object, like why have we built our science around this concept, how this indicator gained hegemony, how that hegemony was related with geopolitical issues, with longer histories of colonialism, of exploitation, of displacement. Then you can learn to see, oh, if these are the problems, then the solutions cannot repeat the same mechanisms. We cannot rely on the same things that took us here for our way out. And I think this is very, very important. We cannot just pretend to live to arrive to this paradigm without understanding what brought us here. And in this, I think degrowth is very critical, but it's also very open and like willing to question its own assumptions. It's a very experimental range of literature and activism. So I would just absolutely invite you to see the very rich and interesting insights that can also complement economics, as Kate was saying. The planetary crisis we're going through is not going to be solved by economists only. We need all social sciences, we need the arts, we need all different forms of engagement in social life to get the solution. And I really think degrowth offers a beautiful patchwork of those thoughts, a truly transdisciplinary approach that does not avoid the hard questions. So if you're interested in the Doughnut model, I think you would definitely be interested in reading a bit of degrowth. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. And my last question for you, Eloy. And can this Doughnut Economics model be implemented in Barcelona?
Yeah, for us, we are very proud to be part of the framework of cities that we work with Kate and her team, and with the team in Barcelona on Doughnut. We have to start next week, so we are very enthusiastic and very to start to work, because for us, Doughnut are very interesting because we're at the same table, the social policies, environmental policies, and economical policies. Because sometimes when you arrive to a city council, what we see is that economical is one department, social is another department, and environment is another department. And they say that they have no relation, no? And they say, no, this is economic. This is not for you because we are talking only on economics, no? And the serious meetings is the economical table, no? And we say, no, I am making economic too, because I am making environment policies. And our colleagues from the social policy say, we are making economical too, because we are making a more economical model. No? So one of for me, it's amazing, the Doughnut is that we can work together and to see what happened in the different points of view. No? One example is, for example, how we have to understand which is the impact of the tourism. Because the tourism have a lot of impacts in the public space, in the labor market, in the environment impact, and the price of the housing. So we have to understand very well that and a different economic point of view, different issues in the city have different points of view and perspectives. No? And when we put together and with this methodology, this methodology of Doughnut, for us is very interesting. And I am very happy to start to work on that. I am very enthusiastic, and I think that we get a lot of information, and that it will help for the future of the Barcelona model. And I am very enthusiastic on that.
Well, thanks very much. I really hope you're finding this session as interesting as I'm finding it. And so we have 25 minutes for audience questions, which is very good. And let's start with the first question prompted in order. And I believe it's from my friend Jonathan Fellman from Sweden, is it? Hello, dear panelists. I would like to know your take on questions of economic and industrial democracy and how it relates to the discussed question about how to reorient the industrial system. I also try to understand how what you say relates to the problem of the industrialization. Anyone of you?
I can jump in. These are quite big concepts, so I'm not exactly sure what is brought here, but the question of economic democracy, I think, is a really important concept. The idea of the democratic ownership of the economic sources of wealth. So when we bring the donut to the city, let me bring this. We need to think about the design of city institutions. I hope I'm going to answer this question from one angle from within. So whenever we work with a city, you can think of Barcelona or any city, we say we need to redesign the city so we're not in these silos that Eloy was just mentioning. So what is the purpose of this city? What is its vision of the transformation? How does it network? How does the city relate to its residents? How does it relate to the suppliers it procures from? How does it relate to other cities? How does it use relationship to hold itself to its vision and values? How is it governed? Who has voice in decision making? What are the metrics of success? But then crucially, how is this place owned? And how it's owned profoundly shapes what finance is doing and whether finance is in service to itself and therefore contradicting this purpose, or whether finance is actually in service here. Now I'm going to zoom in here on ownership, because when we do this work with cities, we ask who in this city owns the sources of wealth creation. So who owns the land and the housing in this city? In the city of Vienna, the city government a long time ago decided that housing is a human right. It's not a luxury investment option. It's a human right. And therefore 60% of people in the city of Vienna live in housing that is social housing owned by the city with a controlled, affordable rent. It's central, it's high quality, it's normal. Very different from other cities where the land and therefore housing is owned by private landlords at extractive rents. Who owns the major utilities? The city of Paris privatized its water supply in the 1990s and then brought it back under public control, realizing that we want to be able to control the direction and the use of this valuable asset. We reap the revenues that we reinvest in public services, but also how water is used is a crucial question for our resource effectiveness. Who owns the data? I think Barcelona is one of the leading cities to say we commit to open data. We recognize that data is a huge resource that can be misused as a power, and we recognize we must develop this with an open data attitude. And then in the city and who owns the enterprises, right? Who owns the businesses in the city? Are they major multinationals that are located in the city but actually don't pay taxes there, even in the country, and the value is just taken to a tax haven somewhere else? Or are they locally based cities, enterprises? The city of Atlanta in the US has 5 times the number of Black-owned enterprises because they have invested in supporting entrepreneurs from that community to build a business. So for me, the question of when I see economic democracy, I think about who owns the sources of wealth creation, because that pattern of ownership will define the dynamics of where that value flows and whether it's recirculated in a distributive way or whether it's siphoned off into few pockets. So I think I love these questions when we drill down into the design of the institutions that run our cities or indeed our nations.
Thanks, Kate. Gabriela or Eloy, you want to answer this question, or let's just go to the next one? Okay. Next one is from Elena. Elena actually helped me to organize this event, and I'm really grateful to her. And her question is, I think that to make society aware of the change we need to go through, as you said, we need to go through a big eco and cultural change. However, I see, for instance, that elder people don't understand what ecology is about. And elders are nowadays the biggest part of the population. My idea is to create a solid narrative to include them in this revolution. Question to you all. Do you have any idea how to involve, encourage, etc., all people in this transition? Again, any one of you?
Yeah, for me, Elena didn't say that, but for me, it's true that we have to make a big change of cultural, but I think that all people can understand very well this problem. I don't think that we have to put the focus that there are a problem. I say that Elena didn't say that, but for me, maybe we have to change the words that we use for them, or we have to make another kind of communication, or we have to make another process with them. But I am absolutely convinced that the old people can be a part of the solution. Absolutely, yes, and they will understand very well the problem. One of the relations between the young people is talking to their parents, to their fathers, no, to say, and their mothers, and they say, okay, which is the future that you give me, no? And this kind of conversation is so powerful, no? In Barcelona, there is not only Fridays for Future, there is fathers and mothers for future, and there's families for future, because the movement very easy increase to understand that this is a problem that we have all together, no? And the old people have one issue that is very useful for the growth, no? They have time, and this is very so powerful because they have the time to make the issues slowly and to make this change, no? And yeah, I think that we have to include more. It's true that we talk a lot about the young people, and that's true that we have to introduce the all ages, no, all people in the narrative. I am completely agree, and we take in account in the future. Yeah.
Thank you, Lloyd. Any other answers, Gabi?
Just very, very briefly, I think one key issue, and I really like this question, it's not a very common question, to engage in meaningful conversations about the transformations we need to do. It's about how life, the narratives of what we expect for life change. Like my parents and older people grew up in a world in which, you know, you had these years of work, years of sacrifice, and then the years in which you enjoy. And that narrative is not feasible anymore. We need to stop relying in that our well-being comes only from what we earn while we were productive for society. I think there is a reproduction of this productivist ethos in which, you know, when you're young, you prepare to work, and then after you work, you get some time to rest. And I think it's that sort of linearity that we need to change and say, we are all equal members of society, regardless of in which time of productivity we are. And I think this can be an uncomfortable conversation, but it surely will be a productive one to have.
Thanks, Gabriela. Next question is from Hans Florian. And well, the first half is an statement and then comes a question. We need an implementation and a policy that stands behind it, but that cannot be the vision. Avoiding disadvantages is not the vision that inspires. Don't we also need something we can love, a mission that everyone wants to contribute to?
I'll jump in and say I strongly agree with that. When I called the donut, it was only an accident, actually. I first drew it on a wall, and a scientist said to me, "Oh, it's a donut," and he named it, and the name stuck. And you know, some people love donuts, some people hate them, but the point here is that nobody is afraid of them. Lots of people are afraid of economics and feel it's exclusive or too difficult, or they never studied it, so they feel intimidated by it. But nobody is afraid of donuts. And I've really discovered that people feel permission to be playful. They feel permission to be silly, to be inventive, creative, artistic, cheeky, irreverent. And those are all wonderful things to bring to transformation. You know, the circus of protest is a really important part of protest. Make it festival. So I think it's incredibly important to have something that you're for, and to articulate that, to be not just against climate change, but to be for a stable climate and healthy soils and fertile soil and healthy oceans and abundant biodiversity and a protective ozone layer overhead. Who couldn't be for that? So we need to make sure we frame our language not only in what we're against, which is in the newspapers every day because we witness it as breakdown, as Eloy began by saying. Some of these things are now irreversible and we're going to witness them. And we have to find within that, but then still what can we be for? And it becomes harder because you can't describe a utopia, a perfect state that it's clear we're not going to go back to that. So it's becoming harder to make a more nuanced statement. But I think Eloy put it actually very well, that it's the degree of breakdown that you prevent, but the vision of social transformation. I mean, I have to say, I really think that in, say, 10 years' time or 20 years' time, goodness, how long we let it take, when we live in cities that don't have fossil fuel trucks and cars and buses pumping smoke in our face as we walk down the street, when that's normal, we will ask ourselves, why did we take so long to get rid of that? Like, what is it that we didn't want to give up? I can't quite remember why we were so keen not to change. And our kids will say, so what, you thought that was normal? Like, I don't, you know, so we have to think forward and think of that possibility and the positive possibility and go through the change that will take us there.
Anyone else on this question? Okay, next question is for Gabriela. This is actually, it does not have to do with the debate. So we'll leave it to the last, if you don't mind, Mario, and we'll keep on with the next questions. And next question is from Mario as well, for Eloy. Would you share some of the ideas, plans you envision for Barcelona to go into an ecological transition? How significant it can be within the state?
Okay, I start with the second part because sometimes when we talk about the problems in the cities, people think that the solution is only at municipal level, but I have to be very clear that we need a frame at country level, at state level, and European level, because we cannot solve this problem only with municipal policies. That not means that we can make a lot of issues in the city, but for me it has to be very clear that we are in a global problem and we need at maximum level Paris Agreement, European Commission, Spanish government, and obviously we have to make a contribution from the cities. No, I talked at the beginning, that maybe it's not so difficult, the changes that we have to make. We talk about the mobility. We have a lot of competence in the city to work hard on mobility that have no emissions, that they are sustainable. We talk about energy. It's true that energy we need funds that help to the people to change the houses because we need a big investments. But we can help from the city to make more easy to implement the solar panels, to make these reforms on the buildings. We can work hard for changing the food. We have schools, we have hospitals, we have a lot of equipment that we can change cultural of what we food, where from. We have to use less meat that we eat now in Spain, and we have different topics that we can work hard here, and we can change some parts of the management of the waste. So we have some topics that Barcelona is working hard on because we want to reduce 0.5% of the emissions for 2030. So we have to work hard next 9 years. And we are working at the same time on adaptation process. We need more green. We need to change the sewage systems because the rains will increase in the future. We have to increase the management of the forests because we know that we have a problem with the forests. We have to make a more reservation for biodiversity. So here we have another competence that we can work hard on that and that we are putting a lot of efforts. And on the last part, we have to work on justice and on climate justice. One of our responsibilities that the challenge that we have to solve, that we have this way that we have to make, nobody keep far away. I said we have to make together. We cannot generate more inequality or more difference between people. So we have to the focus of climate changes of justice, climate justice. The people that don't have resources, we have to help them to make this transition. And I think the public, one of the goals is that we have to get together, and we have to go together and put the focus on people that maybe don't have the same opportunities to make this transition.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's 10 minutes left. There's one final question for Gabriela, which is about the Chilean situation, but I'll allow that because we have plenty of time. And then I will give you a last golden minute to you all just to close down the session. So Gabriela, Mario is asking you, what are you expecting or suggesting to see in the new Chilean constitution? And are you optimistic about the possibilities of change that it can bring about?
Thank you, Tony. I will actually answer in line with the topic of this conversation, obviously, because I think it's extremely urgent, as I was saying, to bring this debate into political spaces. So I will just mention and highlight 3 things that we are very hopeful will happen in the writing of the new constitution. The first one is that we want to recover the public ownership of water. You know, in the middle of our neoliberal reforms, we made water private, and you can buy and sell liters per second of water. It's a system that we invented. I'm not proud of that. And that it has been an ecological disaster. So like one first step into healing and recovering our ecosystems is that we recover public ownership of water. Second one, we are quite sure and certain that we're going to have a plurinational state. That's an amazing news. That means not only, you know, acknowledging them and saying that we are not just one single people, we're several people, and also giving them the autonomy and the possibility to decide what happens in their land and in their worlds. And I think that's also fundamental. That's a fundamental step into recovering our ecosystems and stopping sacrifice zones that obviously tend to be targeting mostly in indigenous lands. And the third one is that overall we expect to strengthen our political decentralization. So local communities have more of a say of what happens and doesn't happen in their territories, because so far it's been such a centralized state that it's impossible to make democratic decisions on what happens on ecosystems. And my higher expectation is actually that one of the proposals that we did from CASA, from Centro de Análisis Socioambiental, is to put in the constitution the notion of planetary boundaries. And here I have to say, we quoted, Kate, your work in there, like how could we write something like the need to stay inside this safe space of the donut? How could we put that in the constitution? You know, like a mandate for our politicians to acknowledge these limits and to acknowledge that they have to design their policies to fit into this safe space. We're going to push for this to be in. I think there is a strong environmental movement that can help us, and we will see. That would be amazing. That would be a first in a constitution. So yeah, that's what I can share.
Indeed, it will be, and it will be even more amazing if you manage to put the concept of ecocide in it. Okay, so one last round just to shut down the session. Kate, would you like to start?
Yes, it's lovely to be offered a golden minute, because people usually ask you for a silver bullet, and I hate silver bullets. I don't want anything that's got a bullet attached. That's not a solution. So a golden minute is a much more beautiful concept. So to me, the golden minute is what I have learned over the last 3 years is the power of peer-to-peer inspiration. I've learned that I can stand on a stage and talk, or go on a podcast and talk about, what if we lived in the donut? What if we made cities that did this or that? And that's fine. But when a mayor or a councillor from a city says, and now we're going to do this, it's a whole different game. And it inspires their peers, mayors and councillors and town councillors around the world. Oh, somebody just like me is doing that thing that I assumed was impossible, but they're doing it. And that means it's possible. And in fact, it means it's desirable. And I want to be part of that. So the work we do at Doughnut Economics Action Lab is to help turn the ideas of Doughnut Economics into tools and ideas. We put them in the commons. They are free and available on our platform. We simply ask, as commoners, we ask for reciprocity. We ask that people share back what they've experienced, or they share back their innovations, because by sharing back, you are creating such ripples of peer-to-peer inspiration. And I don't believe this is the only way that transformation is going to come about, but I sure as heck know this is one of the ways, and I'm fully committed to being part of this work. I think of it as big teamwork. And I want to end on acknowledging that. I think degrowth and Doughnut and well-being and solidarity economy, many different names, we are part of a big team. And it's really important to recognize the connections, because if we don't recognize the connections, we split ourselves and we destroy ourselves from within. So the connections are very strong. And this is big teamwork and it's long work. It's already been going on for decades. We just happen to be the generation of people alive and in positions of possibility in the 2020s. And it's our responsibility, thanks to those who did so much work before us, to work well together to do this transformation now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Actually, one of my favorite English language sayings is sharing is caring. So I totally agree. Eloy?
No, for me, I want to say thank you for the meeting. I think that this Fearless Cities, it was very inspiring, the different panels. And I think that we have been talking here about the growth, about the future, about our life. And I think that it was, for me, very interesting. I hope that the people that participants that attend us feel interesting. And I think that we have to continue working because we are only on the beginning and we have and very passionate 20 years more of strong work on environmental issues, and never more accept that when we talk about ecologists, we say that this is not economy. I think that you have forget forever. When we talk about social, when we talk about ecological issues, we are talking about the future of the economy.
And finally, Gabriela?
Wow, it's really hard. I feel very inspired by this round of closing remarks. I just maybe want to say that right now, I'm so excited about what's happening in Chile. And if you had asked me 3 years ago if this was possible, I would have said no, maybe not. And even I try to be very engaged, and I consider myself an optimistic person. But sometimes the unthinkable, in a good sense, what people tell you it's impossible or utopian, actually happens. And when it happens much quicker than you would think. And then you need to be ready to seize the opportunity. So whenever we get to that change, we need to be ready with the proposals, with the policies, with the energy, with the networks. So, talk to people about this. They're asking these questions, and think about what you would like to do. And all of that, trust me, that you want to have that soil ready whenever that seed starts growing. So would be my closing remark.
Thank you, Gabriela. So let's close down this session. I'm just putting here on the chat the website. We in this edition of Fearless Cities, we just made a new website. It's called networkfearlesscities.com, where all the people that registered into the Fearless Cities website can log in and discuss all the topics that are being dealt in the panels, and make proposals and make suggestions and debate inside that platform. So here you have the website if you're interested, and that's all. I'm very, very, very grateful to you all just to accept this invitation and participate in this amazing session. Thank you all. Thank you, Kate, Gabriela, Eloy. Thank you all the audience. And this session it's been recorded, and it will be on Barcelona en Comú's YouTube channel. You can see it as well in the fearlesscities.com website, and it will be hung as well in the network fearlesscities.com website. So thank you all. Good night, and I hope you see you soon somewhere else.
Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
Thank you, Eloy. Thank you, Kate.